Michael Davis had finally saved enough for a down payment on his first home, a modest three-bedroom ranch in a quiet suburban neighborhood called Oak Ridge Estates. After 7 years of apartment living and countless overtime shifts at the architectural firm where he worked, he was thrilled to have his own yard and the freedom to make changes without a landlord's permission. The moment the realtor handed him the keys, a sense of accomplishment washed over him that made all those years of saving worthwhile. The house itself needed work. Outdated kitchen cabinets from the early 90s, carpeting that had seen better days, and walls desperately in need of fresh paint. But it was the backyard that concerned Michael most. The previous owners, an elderly couple who had moved to Florida to be closer to their children, had left behind an aging above-ground pool that took up nearly 70% of the backyard space. While technically functional, the pool's faded blue liner was patched in several places with duct tape, and the metal ladder had developed an alarming amount of rust where it connected to the pool's frame. During the home inspection, Michael had climbed the rickety steps to peer inside. The water was greenish despite the real estate agent's assurance that chemicals had been added recently. Dead leaves clustered in the corners, and Michael spotted what looked like a small family of frogs that had taken residence near the filter. The inspector had warned him that the pump was likely on its last legs and would need replacement before the pool could be properly maintained. Michael wasn't much of a swimmer anyway. Growing up in an urban apartment complex, he had never developed strong swimming skills, and the few times he'd been invited to friends' pool parties had ended with him lounging in the shallow end or sitting poolside with a book. What he really dreamed of was transforming the space into something more practical. A vegetable garden where he could grow his own produce, surrounded by a comfortable patio area where he could enjoy his morning coffee or host small gatherings with friends. For the first few days in his new home, Michael spent hours researching pool removal costs and gardening plans. He created sketches of raised garden beds, calculated sunlight patterns across his yard, and even started a spreadsheet to track the potential costs of various materials. The more he planned, the more excited he became about the transformation. He envisioned summer evenings hosting barbecues where he could proudly serve salads made from vegetables he'd grown himself. On the 5th day after moving in, Michael finally made the call to a local contractor who specialized in pool removals. The contractor, a friendly man named Dave, agreed to come out the following Monday to assess the job and provide an estimate. "It's a pretty straightforward process," Dave assured him over the phone. "We'll drain it properly, dismantle the frame, and haul everything away. You'll be looking at a clean slate within a couple of days." Little did Michael know that his straightforward home improvement project was about to trigger a neighborhood drama that would test his patience, introduce him to local law enforcement, and ultimately help him discover who his true allies were in Oak Ridge Estates. A week after moving in, Michael was organizing his garage on a Saturday morning, sorting through boxes of tools and hanging up pegboards for better organization. The spring air was crisp, and he had the garage door wide open to enjoy the pleasant weather. He was hammering a nail into the wall when he sensed someone's presence and turned to find a woman standing just outside his garage, watching him with an appraising gaze. She appeared to be in her mid-50s, with meticulously highlighted blonde hair styled in an angled bob that framed a face set in what seemed to be a permanent expression of mild disapproval. Her outfit, pressed khaki capras, a powder blue polo shirt with a small sailboat embroidered on the chest, and pristine white tennis shoes, suggested someone who took great care with her appearance. A large diamond tennis bracelet glinted on her wrist as she adjusted her designer sunglasses. "You must be the new owner," she said, her voice carrying the practiced pleasantness of someone who had served on multiple committees. She stepped forward with an extended hand. "I'm Patricia Wilson. I live in the Colonial with the white picket fence next door." Michael set down his hammer and wiped his dusty palm on his jeans before shaking her hand. "Michael Davis. Nice to meet you." Patricia's handshake was brief and formal. As she released his hand, her gaze moved past him to scan the contents of his garage, her eyes lingering on the stack of moving boxes labeled kitchen that he hadn't yet unpacked. "Welcome to Oak Ridge Estates. I've lived here for 22 years, so I know everything about this neighborhood," she said, emphasizing the word everything in a way that sounded vaguely like a warning. "The Hendersons, the couple who owned this house before you, were very particular about maintaining their property." Without waiting for an invitation, Patricia stepped further into the garage, speaking with an air of authority that suggested she was more than just a neighbor. "We have certain standards here in Oak Ridge. Most homeowners mow their lawns weekly during growing season. Thursdays are ideal, so everything looks fresh for the weekend. And we strongly discourage lawn ornaments or unusual paint colors." Michael nodded politely, though he couldn't help noticing she was speaking as if representing some official neighborhood entity. "Thanks for the tips. I'm still getting settled, but I'm looking forward to making this place my own." Patricia's attention shifted to the backyard visible through the side door of the garage. "The Hendersons always kept that pool immaculate. My grandchildren, Braxton and Madison, love looking at it from our kitchen window." They call it the Blue Lagoon, she said with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. They visit every other weekend, and spotting fish in that pool is their favorite activity. Fish? Michael raised an eyebrow. There are fish in there. Oh, the Hendersons added koi 5 years ago, Patricia waved dismissively. Madison named them all. I see, Michael replied, deciding this was as good a time as any to mention his plans. Actually, I'm planning to remove the pool. It's not in great shape, and I prefer to use the space for gardening. Patricia's smile vanished instantly, replaced by a tight-lipped frown. Her posture stiffened as if he just suggested painting the house neon green. Remove it. That pool has been there for 15 years, she stated firmly, her tone shifting from neighborly to confrontational in an instant. It's part of the neighborhood aesthetic. The Hendersons would be very disappointed to hear that. She paused, then added with significance, as would the Neighborhood Improvement Committee. Before Michael could point out that his realtor had assured him there was no HOA or formal neighborhood committee, Patricia had already turned and marched back toward her house, her tennis shoes crunching purposefully across his gravel driveway. Michael stood in his garage doorway, hammer forgotten in his hand, with a distinct feeling that he had just failed some sort of test he hadn't known he was taking. After the uncomfortable encounter with Patricia, Michael spent the next 2 weeks researching pool removal more thoroughly. He consulted with the city's building department about any permits he might need, spoke with 3 different contractors for quotes, and even had a soil specialist visit to assess what amendments would be needed to make the area garden-ready after the pool was gone. The city clerk confirmed there was no homeowners association governing Oak Ridge Estates, despite Patricia's implications. We get this question a lot from that neighborhood, the clerk said with a knowing smile, especially from new residents who've met Mrs. Wilson. By Friday, Michael had obtained the necessary permits and scheduled the removal for the following day. Dave's crew from Clean Slate Demolition would arrive at 8 a.m. to begin work. Michael taped notices to his front door and mailbox indicating the scheduled construction, more as a courtesy to his neighbors than any actual requirement. Saturday morning arrived with perfect weather for the project, clear skies, and a mild temperature that would keep the workers comfortable. The crew arrived promptly, 3 men in matching navy t-shirts driving a pickup truck and pulling a large dumpster. Dave, the contractor Michael had met earlier, introduced his team and walked Michael through the process once more before they began. First, we'll use these pumps to drain the remaining water into the storm drain, Dave explained, pointing to 2 industrial pumps. Then we'll cut and dismantle the liner and frame. By end of day, we should have everything loaded into the dumpster. The work began efficiently, with 1 worker operating the pumps while the others started removing the deck that surrounded the pool. Michael brought out coffee and donuts mid-morning, appreciating the crew's professionalism and careful approach to avoid damaging his yard beyond the pool area. It was around 10:30 a.m. when Michael noticed movement at the fence line separating his property from Patricia's. Through the kitchen window, he could see Patricia standing rigidly at her side of the fence, smartphone held high, apparently taking pictures or possibly video of the work in progress. She made no attempt to hide her surveillance, occasionally writing something in a small notebook she carried. By lunchtime, the pool was fully drained, revealing years of accumulated debris at the bottom, leaves, twigs, a few tennis balls, and what appeared to be a plastic dinosaur toy. There were, notably, no koi fish to be seen. The crew had started dismantling the metal frame, carefully stacking the components near the dumpster. During their lunch break, as the workers sat in the shade of Michael's porch eating sandwiches, Patricia made her move. She approached from her yard, walking along the perimeter of Michael's property until she reached the workers. She carried a manila folder under one arm and wore an expression of stern determination. "Excuse me," she addressed Dave directly, ignoring Michael entirely. "I believe you need to cease work immediately. The neighborhood association hasn't approved this removal." Dave looked confused and glanced at Michael, who stepped forward. "There is no official neighborhood association here, Patricia. I've already checked with the city and obtained all the necessary permits." He held up the paperwork as evidence. Patricia's lips thinned to a barely visible line. "The Oak Ridge Estates Improvement Committee has been operating for 15 years. Just because it's not registered with the city doesn't mean it lacks authority." She pulled a document from her folder that appeared to be printed on official-looking letterhead. "This is a formal notice of violation." Michael took the paper and scanned it quickly. It was indeed impressive-looking, with a logo that combined an oak tree and a house, but the violation cited was for diminishing neighborhood character and collective property values through unauthorized removal of established water features. The bottom of the letter listed Patricia herself as both committee chairperson and treasurer. "I'm sorry, Patricia, but this isn't legally binding," Michael said, handing the paper back. "I've done my due diligence with the actual authorities. The work will continue." Patricia's face flushed with anger. "We'll see about that," she snapped, pulling out her phone again and walking away with purpose in her step. Michael watched her go, a sense of unease growing as he wondered what her next move would be. By late afternoon, the pool dismantling was nearly complete. The metal frame had been disassembled, the liner cut into manageable sections, and the crew was efficiently loading the last pieces into the dumpster. Michael felt a sense of accomplishment as he surveyed the now empty space where the pool had been, a blank canvas for his garden plans. Dave approached Michael with paperwork for him to sign off on the job. "We'll be out of your hair in about 20 minutes, he said. "Just need to load the last few pieces and do a final sweep of the area to make sure we haven't left any debris." Michael was reviewing the invoice when the distinctive sound of sirens cut through the quiet neighborhood. At first, he assumed they were passing by on the main road, but the wailing grew louder until two police cruisers pulled into his driveway, lights flashing dramatically against the houses across the street. Neighbors who had been mostly indifferent to the pool removal suddenly appeared on porches and at windows, drawn by the commotion. The police cruisers parked at angles that effectively blocked both the contractor's truck and the dumpster. Two officers emerged from each vehicle, a show of force that seemed wildly disproportionate for a residential call. One officer, an older man with a salt and pepper mustache and a nameplate reading Sergeant Reynolds, approached while the others stood by the vehicles, hands resting near their equipment belts. "Good afternoon," Sergeant Reynolds said, his expression professionally neutral. "We received a call about property destruction and illegal dumping taking place at this address. Apparently, there's also a concern about wildlife endangerment." Michael blinked in confusion. Wildlife endangerment? The caller reported protected koi fish being illegally removed from their habitat. The sergeant explained, though his tone suggested he was already questioning the validity of the call. From the corner of his eye, Michael could see Patricia standing at the edge of her property, arms crossed in satisfaction as she watched the scene unfold. He noticed she changed into a more formal outfit, a blazer over a blouse, as if preparing for an official meeting. "There were no fish in the pool," Michael explained calmly, "and this is all completely legal." He retrieved his folder of permits from the porch and handed them to the officer. "I've obtained all the necessary permits for removing my pool. The contractor is licensed and bonded, and we're using a proper disposal service." He gestured toward Dave, who stepped forward with his own documentation. Sergeant Reynolds reviewed the paperwork thoroughly. "And this is your property? You're the homeowner?" "Yes, I closed on the house 3 weeks ago." Michael produced his deed and identification. The officer nodded, then stepped away to confer with his colleagues. Through fragments of conversation that drifted back, Michael heard phrases like waste of resources and third call this month. After a brief radio exchange, the sergeant returned. "Everything appears to be in order, Mr. Davis. I apologize for the disruption." He lowered his voice slightly. "For what it's worth, we've had several calls from this neighborhood about similar issues. The woman who called claimed you were, and I quote, decreasing property values by destroying community resources and removing a historic neighborhood landmark without approval." Michael couldn't help but laugh. The landmark is a 15-year-old above-ground pool that was falling apart. The sergeant's mustache twitched in what might have been a suppressed smile. "She also mentioned something about a neighborhood committee." "A committee of one," Michael replied. "There's no HOA or official neighborhood organization here. I confirmed that with the city." Sergeant Reynolds nodded. "That's what we thought. Again, I apologize for the interruption." He glanced toward Patricia, who was now approaching with purposeful strides, manila folder in hand. The officer quickly turned back to Michael. "We'll be on our way. Good luck with your garden plans." As the police cruisers backed out of the driveway, their lights now off, Patricia reached the edge of Michael's lawn. Her expression of triumph had been replaced by one of indignant disbelief as she watched the officers depart without taking any action. Michael spent the rest of the afternoon with Dave finalizing the pool removal. After the crew left, he ordered takeout Chinese food and was enjoying his dinner while researching raised garden bed designs on his laptop. The clock had just struck 8:30 p.m. when a series of sharp, aggressive knocks rattled his front door. The pounding was so forceful that Michael's in-your-house key, hanging from a hook near the entryway, swung back and forth with each impact. Taking a deep breath, Michael set aside his laptop and approached the door. Through the peephole, he could see Patricia standing on his porch, her posture rigid with indignation. She was not alone. Behind her stood a tall, thin man with thinning gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses who seemed to be trying to make himself as small as possible despite his height. He kept glancing sideways as if contemplating an escape route. Michael opened the door, keeping his expression neutral. "Hello, Patricia." "Mr. Davis," she responded with exaggerated formality as if they were adversaries in a courtroom drama. "I believe you owe us an explanation. And compensation." She gestured to the man behind her. "This is my husband, Richard." Richard Wilson offered a weak wave and an apologetic smile that disappeared when Patricia glanced back at him. "Hello," he mumbled, studying the welcome mat with sudden interest. "May I ask what you believe I need to explain or compensate you for?" Michael asked, keeping his tone measured despite the absurdity of the situation. Patricia's face flushed a deeper shade of red, and she thrust a document toward him, another from her seemingly endless supply of official-looking papers. This is a formal notice of intent to sue for property value diminishment, visual easement violation, and emotional distress. Michael scanned the document, which appeared to be created from a template with law offices of in the header, though no actual law firm was named. The text outlined a bizarre claim that by removing the pool, Michael had violated something called a visual enjoyment easement that the Wilsons supposedly held over his property. Patricia, Michael said carefully, there is no such easement registered with the property. I had reviewed all documents thoroughly during closing. It's an implied easement, Patricia snapped back, clearly having researched just enough legal terminology to be dangerous. My grandchildren have enjoyed looking at that pool for years. They specifically asked to sit at my kitchen table so they can see it. Now what are they supposed to look at? Your dirt patch? Richard shifted uncomfortably behind his wife. Pat, maybe we should discuss this another. Not now, Richard. Patricia cut him off without turning around. She refocused on Michael. Without that pool, Braxton and Madison will no longer want to visit us. Do you understand what that means? You've destroyed our relationship with our grandchildren. Michael blinked, genuinely stunned by the leap in logic. I'm sorry, but how exactly would a pool on a neighbor's property determine whether your grandchildren visit you? They're children. They need visual stimulation, entertainment. Patricia's voice had risen to a level that was surely audible to the surrounding houses. That pool was the only reason they tolerated visiting this boring neighborhood. We don't have video games or those tic-tacs they're always watching. Tic-tacs, Richard murmured, but fell silent when Patricia shot him a glare. Without that pool to look at, they'll insist on staying with their other grandparents in Lakeside who have a big screen TV and faster internet. Patricia's voice cracked slightly. So yes, you are legally responsible for this emotional damage to our family, and we expect compensation. Michael struggled to maintain his composure in the face of such an outlandish claim. He noticed Richard had taken another small step backward, now standing partially in the shadow of a porch column as if hoping to disappear into it. The morning after Patricia's bizarre confrontation on his porch, Michael decided to clear his head with yard work. He was using a rake to level the soil where the pool had been when a tentative voice called from the sidewalk. Excuse me? Are you Michael Davis? Michael looked up to see an elderly woman with silver hair and a kind face, wearing a gardening hat and gloves despite the fact she carried no gardening tools. Beside her stood a man of similar age leaning slightly on a wooden cane. I'm Margaret Sinclair, and this is my husband, George, the woman said. We live in the blue colonial across the street and 2 doors down. She pointed to a well-maintained house with cheerful flower boxes. We saw all the commotion yesterday and wanted to check if everything's all right. Michael set his rake aside and walked over to greet them properly. Everything's fine, just a misunderstanding with my neighbor about removing the pool. Margaret and George exchanged knowing glances. Patricia Wilson, George said, not a question, but a resigned statement. We've lived here 25 years, Margaret explained. Since before the Wilsons moved in. We wanted to welcome you properly and, well, she hesitated, looking uncomfortable. And warn you. George finished for her, earning a gentle nudge from his wife. What? The boy deserves fair warning about Hurricane Patricia. Margaret sighed. What my husband means is that Patricia can be challenging. When we installed a bird feeder 3 years ago, she called animal control, claiming it would attract disease-carrying vermin. She told them our feeders were causing a rat infestation. Which was nonsense, George added. The inspector found nothing but said we should clean below the feeders regularly, which we already did. Not that facts ever stopped Patricia. Over the next few days, a steady stream of neighbors found reasons to stop by Michael's house. Each introduction followed a similar pattern. Friendly welcome, sympathetic explanation that they'd witnessed the pool removal drama, and then their own Patricia story. Jason and David, a couple who had moved in 6 months earlier, recounted how Patricia had organized a petition against their fence color, a perfectly normal sage green that she claimed was aggressively non-traditional. The Jensen family from down the block shared how their daughter's graduation party had been interrupted by Patricia complaining about parking, despite all cars being legally parked. Robert Kim, who lived directly behind the Wilsons, described Patricia's campaign against his vegetable garden, claiming the tomato plants were unsightly agricultural use in a residential zone. Perhaps most surprising was the visit from Elaine Foster, an older woman who lived directly across from Patricia's house. After sharing pleasantries and offering Michael a homemade apple pie, Elaine lowered her voice conspiratorially. I have security cameras covering my front yard after someone kept damaging my roses last year, she explained. I'd reviewed the footage from 3 weeks ago, before you moved in, and found something interesting. She pulled out her phone and showed Michael a video. The night vision footage clearly showed Patricia, flashlight in hand, slipping into Michael's then-vacant backyard with a measuring tape. For nearly 15 minutes, she meticulously measured the pool's dimensions, occasionally making notes in a small notebook. She did this 3 different nights, Elaine said. I thought it was strange, but it wasn't my place to say anything to the realtor. After yesterday's police visit, though, she shrugged. Thought you should know what you're dealing with. 6 months passed, and the transformation of Michael's backyard was nearly complete. Where the old pool once stood, 8 raised garden beds now formed an attractive geometric pattern. The early summer weather had been ideal for growing, and his carefully tended plants were thriving, cherry tomatoes climbing their trellises, bell peppers displaying their first fruits, and a variety of herbs filling the air with fragrant aromas when the breeze blew just right. The centerpiece of the garden was a small flagstone patio where Michael had positioned an outdoor table and comfortable chairs. He'd added solar-powered string lights that gave the space a magical quality in the evenings. It had become his habit to enjoy his morning coffee there, watching the birds and butterflies that had discovered his little oasis. True to her nature, Patricia had followed through on her threats to report Michael to various authorities. The city zoning board received a 16-page complaint about unauthorized agricultural activity in a residential zone, complete with daily photographs of Michael's progress. The health department was summoned to investigate claims of standing water breeding mosquitoes, where there was only a small bird bath that Michael diligently refreshed every other day. She even contacted the water district with accusations that Michael's garden would cause excessive drainage into the storm system, a claim so absurd that the inspector who visited couldn't help but laugh as he signed off on the perfectly graded landscape. Each complaint was investigated and dismissed, and each dismissal seemed to fuel Patricia's determination. Her surveillance became so constant that some neighbors had started a discreet betting pool on which window of her house they would spot her watching from next. The situation reached its peak when Michael returned from work one evening to find his garden bathed in harsh light. Patricia had installed 4 powerful security floodlights along her fence line, all aimed directly at his property. The lights were so bright that he had to squint to see his plants, and the peaceful atmosphere he created was shattered by the prison yard illumination. When Michael knocked on the Wilsons' door to discuss the issue, Richard answered, looking more uncomfortable than ever. I'm sorry about the lights, he whispered, glancing over his shoulder. She claims they're for security, but he trailed off as Patricia appeared behind him. Those lights are well within my rights, she declared before Michael could speak. There's been suspicious activity in your yard, nighttime gatherings. That was a barbecue with neighbors, Michael explained calmly. And while you're entitled to security lighting, there are ordinances about light direction and intensity. The city has specific rules about light pollution and nuisance lighting. Richard's eyes widened slightly at this information, but Patricia merely crossed her arms. Are you threatening legal action? Not at all, Michael replied. I'm just hoping we can resolve this amicably. Those lights are affecting my ability to enjoy my property, and they're disrupting the local wildlife. The Audubon Society has guidelines about. The Audubon Society isn't a governmental authority, Patricia cut in, though Michael noticed a flicker of uncertainty in her expression. True, Michael agreed. But the county environmental protection ordinances that incorporate their guidelines are. Section 12.3 covers light pollution effects on migratory birds. Later that evening, after a quiet conversation with Richard alone, during which the mild-mannered man had seemed genuinely interested in Michael's garden plans, the harsh floodlights were redirected to shine only on the Wilsons' property. 2 days later, they were replaced with softer, downward-facing path lights that actually enhanced the appearance of both yards. The following weekend, Michael hosted his first official